My name is Piper, and at 29 I had a job I was proud of, a studio apartment in East Van I'd saved 3 years to afford, and a family I was still trying to convince myself loved me back the way I loved them. The night my sister-in-law looked across the Thanksgiving table and said, "It's really just going to be immediate family at the cabin this year," while my brother stared at the gravy boat, and my father suddenly found the ceiling very interesting. That was the night something in me finally stopped apologizing for existing. Before I tell you what happened after I drove home alone that night, drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from. If you've ever bent yourself in half, trying to fit into a family that never quite made room for you, you already know the specific weight of this. I grew up in Kelowna, the second of 2 kids. My brother is 3 years older, my parents first, their loudest celebration. I came along quieter, bookish, the one who got good marks without anyone having to ask. For a while, I thought that meant something. I'd learn differently. My father ran a small residential contracting business, decks, renos, the kind of work that keeps a family comfortable in a mid-sized BC city, but never quite comfortable enough. My mother taught piano lessons from a studio she built into the basement. There was always money for what mattered. And the question of what mattered was never really mine to answer. My brother was the outdoor kid. Skiing, hockey, weekend trips to Okanagan Lake with my dad. I asked once if I could come along on one of those fishing weekends. My father laughed, not cruelly, just carelessly. "That's just us guys, Pip." He promised we'd find our thing. We never did. I found grades instead. Straight A's through high school and early acceptance to SFU for computer science, a co-op placement in my second year that turned into my first real job. Nobody made a fuss. When I called home to say I'd been offered a full-time position before I'd even graduated, my mother said, "That's wonderful," and then asked if I'd heard about my brother's new food truck concept. My brother had, by that point, dropped out of BCIT after 2 semesters, spent a year bartending in Whistler, tried his hand at personal training, and was now pivoting to a mobile food business with a Vietnamese fusion concept he did not have the cooking skills to execute. My parents lit up when he talked about it. They asked questions. They drove out to try the food. When I defended my thesis, my mother called from the parking lot after the ceremony and said she was sorry she'd missed it, that my brother had needed help moving. I didn't let it harden me. That was always my mistake. I just worked harder instead. By 25, I was a project manager at a mid-sized software firm in Vancouver. By 27, I'd been promoted twice and was leading a team of 11 people. I bought my studio in East Van on a 5% down payment with money I'd saved while living on almost nothing for 2 years. Every financial decision I made alone, without anyone's advice or anyone's check. My father's contracting business started struggling the year I turned 26. A slow construction market, a couple of clients who didn't pay, equipment costs that kept rising. He called me one evening, his voice careful and quiet, in the way that told me the conversation had been rehearsed. He needed help covering payroll, just until a big job came through. He promised paperwork. I transferred $45,000 over 3 payments across 18 months. I had a lawyer draft a simple promissory note. My father signed it without reading it very carefully, which I noticed. My brother's food truck folded 8 months after it launched. 2 of the tires had rusted through from a wet winter, the commissary kitchen contract fell through, and he owed money to 3 suppliers. He called me on a Thursday. By Friday I had sent $28,000. No promissory note that time. He said he'd pay me back when he was back on his feet. I told him not to worry about it. He didn't. My mother's right knee had been bad for years, an old figure skating injury, worsened by decades of sitting at a piano bench. By the time I was 27, she needed regular physiotherapy to stay functional. My parents had basic coverage through the provincial plan, but specialist physio is not covered under MSP in BC, and the out-of-pocket costs for twice-weekly sessions at the clinic she needed added up fast. I found out about it when she mentioned, offhand, that she'd had to drop to once a week because it was getting expensive. I set up a direct payment arrangement with the clinic without telling anyone. $850 a month, charged to a card my parents never saw. I kept that up for 26 months. I never brought it up at dinner. Around that same time, my aunt, my father's older sister, the one who calls on birthdays, and actually means it, told me over the phone that she'd been asking my father how I was doing and he'd said, "Oh, Piper's fine, she's always fine." She said it warmly, like it was a compliment. I hung up and sat with that for a long time. The family cabin complicated things further. My parents owned a quarter share in a lake property near Shuswap with 2 other families. When one of the co-owners wanted to sell their share, my father couldn't afford to buy them out. My brother offered to go in with him but didn't have the cash either. I ended up covering a portion of the mortgage, $1,400 a month for just over 4 years. I visited the cabin 3 times in that whole period. Once in summer, once for a long weekend in September, once at Christmas where I slept on a pull-out couch while my brother and his wife took the only bedroom with a proper door. I'm telling you all of this, not for sympathy. I'm telling you because by the time that Thanksgiving dinner happened, I had been quietly bankrolling the comfort of people who didn't notice, while telling myself it was just what family did. Let me back up slightly, because you need to understand the sister-in-law situation. My brother met her at a mountain biking event in North Van when they were both 28. She is charming in the particular way of people who know they are being observed. She comes from a family with significantly more money than ours. Her father is a commercial real estate developer in the Lower Mainland. And she brings that money into rooms without ever quite spending it. If you understand what I mean. She has strong opinions about what constitutes success and a consistent habit of listing my professional accomplishments back to me in a tone that implied I had sacrificed something important to get them. Still no time to date? She asked at Christmas one year. I was 27 and had just closed a project 8 weeks ahead of schedule. You're so dedicated. I just think balance is important. She never liked me. She was never rude enough that I could point to anything specific. She just made me aware, in small and reliable ways, that she found me slightly lacking. I didn't let that change how I showed up. I brought gifts at Christmas. I remembered her birthday. When they renovated their kitchen in Coquitlam, I sent dinner from their favorite restaurant every Friday for a month, because I knew how stressful renovations were, and because I was trying very hard to be the kind of family member I wanted to receive. I don't know exactly when my brother started agreeing with her. Instead of noticing me, maybe he always had, and I'd just been too busy hoping to see it clearly. The Thanksgiving dinner was at my parents' place in Kelowna. I drove up the night before, so I could help my mother with the prep. I made the cranberry sauce and the pie crust from scratch. My sister-in-law brought a store-bought cheesecake and accepted the praise for it with great grace. We were clearing the first plates when I mentioned the New Year's trip. A close friend of mine, the person I'm nearest to at work, who has quietly witnessed more of this than she ever signed up for, had been encouraging me to actually use the cabin for once. To show up and take up space instead of just paying for space I never occupied. I'd started to believe her. I told the table I was planning on coming for the New Year's weekend. I said I'd been looking forward to it. My sister-in-law set down her fork. Actually, she said, and I could hear the rehearsal in it, we're keeping the cabin pretty small this year, just immediate family. I looked at her. I looked at my brother. He looked at the tablecloth. I'm sorry, I said carefully. I must have misheard you. We just thought it would be nice to keep it close, my sister-in-law continued. You know how it gets when there are too many people. I'm not too many people, I said. I'm one person, who has been paying into this cabin for 4 years. Silence spread across the table like something spilled. My brother cleared his throat. It's not like that, Pip. We just want some time that's, core family. Core family. I looked at my father. He was studying his plate with tremendous concentration. I looked at my mother. She reached for her water glass with her right hand, the hand connected to the knee I'd been quietly paying to keep functional for over 2 years. I folded my napkin the way I always did when I needed to keep my face from doing something I'd regret. I said, okay, I understand. I helped clear the rest of the table. I did the dishes. I drove 2 hours back to Vancouver that night, instead of staying over like I'd planned. I didn't cry until I got home. Then I sat in the parking garage of my building for 22 minutes before I could make myself go inside. I want to be honest about those first few days. I was not strategic. I was not plotting anything. I was just devastated in the exhausted way you get when you realize you have been working very hard toward something that was never going to happen. I went to work. I led meetings. I ate takeout at my desk 3 nights in a row. My friend found me in the staff kitchen on the Wednesday after and asked what was wrong with my face. I told her the whole thing. She listened without interrupting, which is something very few people can actually do. Then she asked me one question. Have you ever added up what you've actually given them? I hadn't. I knew each piece separately, but I'd never looked at them together. I opened my laptop and pulled up my bank statements going back 5 years. The number was $167,000. I said it out loud, $167,000. My friend didn't speak for a moment. Then she said quietly, Piper, you've been paying for your own exclusion. I stared at the screen for a long time. That Thursday night, my phone buzzed with a text from my father, brief and cheerful in the way of someone who genuinely does not understand that a problem exists. Hey Pip, the deposit for the shoe swap cabin is coming due. It's $3,600 this year because the co-owners raised their share. Any chance you could cover it this month, and we'll sort it out after the holidays? Thanks, kiddo. I read it 3 times. I screenshotted it. Then I replied, Hi Dad. Request declined this time around. Probably best to handle the deposit internally, since it's a core family trip. Hope it works out. I turned my phone face down on my desk. I did not sleep well that night. But when I woke up, something felt different, cleaner, like I had finally stopped holding my breath. By morning, I had 4 missed calls from my father, 2 from my brother, and a text from my sister-in-law. I don't know what you think you're proving, but this is really immature and it's upsetting your mother. My brother's voicemail said, After everything this family has done for you, this is how you act? Over a cabin trip? Grow up. Everything this family had done for me. I didn't respond to any of them. I called my aunt, my father's sister, the one who had always been the honest one in that family. I told her what had happened. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, I need to tell you something. Your brother has been talking about that cabin trip for months. There was a whole conversation about whether you should be included. Your parents knew before Thanksgiving. I sat with that. They planned it, I said. I think they believed it would just happen, that you'd accept it, and they wouldn't have to have a difficult conversation. And yet they still expected me to pay the deposit. My aunt didn't have an answer for that, neither did I. I spent the next 3 evenings doing something that felt strangely calm. I drafted an email. I listed every financial transfer from the past 5 years with dates and amounts. The loans to my father, the money for my brother's food truck, the physiotherapy payments I had been making directly to my mother's clinic without anyone's knowledge, and 49 months of cabin mortgage contributions. I informed them that I would be removing myself from the cabin mortgage arrangement immediately, and that the outstanding loan amounts were due within 60 days, per the terms of the promissory note my father had signed. I closed with one line. I have been glad to support this family when support was needed. I understand now that financial support and belonging are not the same thing. I wish you well with the trip. I hit send and sat very still. 3 days later, they showed up at my apartment. My father, my brother, and my sister-in-law. I looked through the peephole for a long moment before I opened the door. I left it half open and stood in the frame. My father spoke first, in the voice he used when he was trying to sound reasonable. He said my brother hadn't meant anything by it, that they'd all been under stress, that family was family, and I was overreacting to one comment. I'm not overreacting to one comment, I said. You planned my exclusion before Thanksgiving. Then you asked me to pay the deposit for the trip you excluded me from. The cabin finances are complicated. They really aren't, I said. I've been paying $1,400 a month for 4 years. The math is very simple. My sister-in-law stepped forward. Her voice had the particular steadiness of someone who was used to winning arguments. You don't understand how much pressure your brother has been under. His business failed. Your parents have real expenses. Not everyone earns what you earn. I earn what I earn because I built it, I said, alone, without anyone's deposit. You act like you're better than us, my brother said, quietly. And there it was. The thing that had always been underneath everything, finally out in the open. I don't think I'm better than you, I said. I think I've been invisible to you, and I'm done making that easy. My father's voice shifted. Some of the warmth dropped out of it. If you pull out of the mortgage, we're short every month. We could lose our share of the property. I know, I said. That's why I gave you 60 days notice in the email. It was more than anyone gave me at the Thanksgiving table. You are going to blow up this family over a holiday trip, my sister-in-law said. I'm not blowing anything up, I said. I'm just not paying for it anymore. I thanked them for coming, and said I'd follow up in writing about the mortgage transition. When they didn't move, I told them I had an early meeting, and began closing the door. My brother put his hand on the frame. Piper, he said, and his voice had changed. The anger was gone. I'm sorry, about the trip. I should have said something at dinner when she brought it up. I looked at him for a moment. Yeah, I said, you should have. I closed the door. That night the family group chat lit up with messages from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years, most of them taking a version of my parents' side, and working from a version of events that had been edited significantly in favor of the people doing the telling. I sent one reply to the whole thread. In the past 5 years I've contributed $167,000 to this family in loans, shared expenses, and direct medical payments for my mother's care. Last month I was told I wasn't considered immediate family. I'm choosing to align my financial involvement with that understanding. I've documented everything and shared it with those directly involved. I wish everyone a good holiday. Then, I left the chat. I won't pretend the weeks after that were easy. There's a specific grief in finally accepting that the family you spent years trying to earn a place in was never going to give you what you needed. My therapist, I'd been seeing her for about a year at that point, working through some older patterns, called it mourning a version of things that had never fully existed. That was about right. What I hadn't expected were the calls from the edges. My aunt called first. She was furious on my behalf in the clean, clarifying way of someone who has watched something wrong unfold for a long time, and is finally allowed to say so. She told me she'd spoken with my father, that this pattern had been visible to people outside it for years, the way I was called upon and then looked past, the way my contributions were absorbed without comment or acknowledgement. You are not invisible to everyone, she said, only to the wrong people. A second cousin I hadn't spoken to in 4 years sent a text saying she'd heard what happened and thought I'd handled it with more composure than she could have managed. Those felt small at the time, they grew. My friend at work had, it turned out, navigated something similar with her own family. A different shape, the same underlying architecture of conditional belonging. We started having long lunches. She introduced me to someone she knew, a landscape architect named Greta, who had done the same hard thing with her family 2 years earlier, and was clearly better for having done it. Greta brought wine to my apartment one evening and we talked until well past midnight, and I walked her to the bus stop afterward and felt, for the first time in a long time, like I was exactly the right person to be. The financial peace with my family was quieter than I'd expected. My father made 2 partial payments on the promissory note, about $12,000 total, spread over 4 months. And then the payment stopped. My brother paid nothing. I didn't pursue aggressive collection. The documentation mattered more to me, as a record of what had actually happened, than as money I expected to recover. My mother called 3 weeks after the confrontation at my door. She asked if she could meet me for coffee the next time I was in Kelowna. She didn't say what for. I drove up on a Saturday in November. She was already at the table when I arrived. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not in a dramatic way, just the ordinary kind of smaller that happens when someone you've loved without enough honesty is suddenly, quietly, asking to be honest with you. She said, "I knew about the trip before Thanksgiving, I didn't tell you. I don't know what I thought, that it would be easier if it just happened." I said, "Easier for who?" She didn't answer that. "I should have said something at the table," she said. "When your sister-in-law said what she said. I should have said Piper is family, full stop, and that should have been the end of it." "Why didn't you?" She thought about it for a long moment. "Because your brother gets upset, and I've always found it easier to manage his feelings than to protect yours. You were always so." "Fine," I said. She looked at me. "You were always so fine," she said quietly. "I let myself believe that meant you didn't need anything." That was the most honest thing she'd said to me in years. I think she knew it. I told her I had stopped the clinic payments when I sent the email. She said she knew, that the clinic had called her. I said I was willing to resume covering her physiotherapy, because her health was separate from the rest of it, and because I was not trying to hurt her. But that I needed her to understand the difference between what I'd been giving and what I'd been getting back. She nodded. I believed her at least as much as she was able. I set up the clinic payments again the following week. Every other boundary I'd drawn stayed exactly where I had put it. The shoe swap trip happened in January without me. My aunt told me afterward that attendance was thin, that my brother and sister-in-law had had some kind of argument, that my father had seemed distracted the whole weekend. I held that information quietly and didn't do anything with it. In February, I hosted what my friend called a deliberate replacement dinner at my apartment. She came with her partner. Greta came and brought her daughter. My aunt drove down from the Okanagan and arrived with a bottle of Naramata Red and a lemon tart she'd made that morning. We crowded around my small table with an extra leaf I had never used before, and we talked, and laughed well past the point where I'd expected everyone to leave. At some point late in the evening, my aunt raised her glass and said, "To the family you build." I thought about the cabin I'd been paying for, and had barely visited. I thought about the table I'd been asked to leave while they were still counting on my money to keep the chairs. I raised my glass. My brother called once, about 4 months after. He said he thought we should put all of this behind us, that family was important, that he'd been under a lot of pressure. He did not specifically apologize. He asked if I'd consider rejoining the cabin mortgage because they were behind on payments. I told him I wished him well and that I hoped the trip had been worth it. He hung up. I don't lie awake about it anymore. That is the honest truth of where I have landed. The loss was real. I won't minimize that. I spent a long time grieving the version of my family I had been trying to build with people who were not building back. But there is a specific relief that comes when you finally stop pretending. When you stop attending dinners, hoping that this time someone will notice you drove 3 hours to be there. When you stop covering the deposit on the trip, you are not invited to join. Being capable does not obligate you to fund the people who take it for granted. Showing up financially is not the same as being welcomed, and the people who call you fine the most often are usually the ones paying the least attention. If you are somewhere right now, tired in that particular way of someone who has been bending toward people who do not bend back, please hear this. You are not invisible to everyone, only to the wrong ones. It is okay to stop paying for your own exclusion. If you've had to draw a line like this one, I want to hear from you in the comments. Not because misery loves company, but because the specific kind of grief doesn't get talked about enough. And I think it should. Whatever you're carrying right now, you are not carrying it alone.